Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 4th of October. Well, Friday, interesting day. I mean, we were continuing on this move where we had the expectation of reaching the 0% from the MBI, moving above white, even though the previous peak was slightly below magenta. So it's one of those where you can expect some stabilization, particularly if you get the move of magenta back over. And ironically, started off the day, went all the way down, and the low actually is 42.60, which matches the 0%. So that fulfilled its expectation when we saw this crossover here, because from a daily standpoint, we've seen that tends to work. It hasn't happened that often, especially given the year and of super bullishness. But nonetheless, fulfilled it on slightly rising. 0%, of course, just a fraction above where it was from when the signal first came in, and we saw the crossover of white above. So all in all, that was within expectations. We had then a huge move to the upside from there, so the buy algos kicked in a pretty significant way, and that's where you see the steel rising, short-term buyers jumping in, and the drop of orange. What we would be looking for from a continuation south would be the rise of the orange readings from there. And if you're going to continue to get rising red, that would form a P2 pivot, which would be important at this particular stage for the bullish narrative. We've gone from negative extremes with the magenta here to the light green, which is also indicating positive buying within that dip as it was taking place, and we're magenta over cyan, even though it's still falling. Now we're seeing the potential of white moving back over magenta, and once we're in this what you might want to refer to as slightly oversold kind of condition, we could see a lot of bouncing back and forth within that setup. But with white leading, tends to be a little bit bearish, but you've got some other bullish signs, so that gives it sort of that kind of conflict signal battle. Oh, forgot to turn the paint bar back on here. Likewise, NASDAQ, though, much weaker because that white has remained well above. You have the de facto cross, which is basically both declining, which is a little bit weak. So the NASDAQ looks to be a bit softer condition in general, and so it may be more likely to break into new lows. There was a spike on TLT for treasuries, meaning lower yields, but as we can see in the pre-market, it's pretty much giving back a lot of that move, and that would be the indication that inflationary pressures are going to push rates higher, whether the Fed wants it or not. And if they lose control over that aspect of it, who knows where things will go from there, because that would be a complete breakdown of the traditional market setups. Slight bounce back in the euro, but we can see, look at that white writing above there. It's been negative ever since that crossover, and pretty clean from that standpoint. Oil continuing its march to the highs. I think even in Italy they announced a 40% increase in electric bills going forward. Think of how that's going to play out. I mean, you're talking about inflation, but that's going to be massive for a disruption situation. Who knows how that's going to play out. Certainly going to kill Eurozone growth. Well, not that there was much, but whatever little there was, that certainly would wipe it out. And you had this buy signal set up from Bitcoin, and again, you're going to pull money out of the market, you got to park it somewhere, and if you want to hedge against some of those things that you can see coming through, this is what we've talked about as an alternative to the gold park trade. And sure enough, that was a massive spike just as the market was suffering those wild gyrations, and that's just an indication that it's just being used as a store of value outside of the normal ranges where commodities used to be the thing. You can certainly get much more explosive behavior, particularly with the smaller volumes and limited access, and the futures market of that makes that available, plus sets up a whole nother round of possibilities for shorts. As I've pointed out with the studies and that we had, the short side from the crypto side has made a lot more than the long side. From a 50K standpoint, still adjusting with the programs. Obviously, these MBIs can take that setup a little bit forward from the buy signal, and also working with the dot setup to adjust it. If we look at the latest, I did some work on the adjustments that can be made for the inputs. And if we take a look at the general view, pretty darn solid, 53% on the longs, working on the adjustments for short side of that setup to improve it. Pretty decent RNIA index right here at 265. If you ever want to read what that is, you just click it and you can literally detail exactly how it's determined. And what's relevant about this setup is we're 73% of the time in the market within these setups. And as you can see, from our viewpoint, plenty of areas where there's going to be improvement on entry as well as exits from the short standpoint in that. So that's going to continue to evolve. And from a 5K standpoint, well, we can take a look at what that day looked like. Went all the way back. It was pretty active. We ended up with a lot of activity. We had that giant pre-market setup that literally started with this. That was the dip in the post-market setup that took us all the way to the lows, and then from there caught the bid, continued to get P2, P3s, and boom, the skyrocket off there, all on positive extremes at the 42.85 range right there, marked them, and sure enough, we just came back, filled all those, and that set up the new buy configuration within there. And once it began from there, we ended up with the spike, but as you can see, never dipped below the red and backed up, which is usually the strongest configuration, at least from a short side. So this was really hyper bullish, and again, adjusting the code within those to accommodate that kind of return setup. We can see the final end to what would be a bearish setup with the dots when it was pretty much sideways going across here, and then boom, ends it with that complete setup. I would argue that probably a little earlier. What this was waiting for on that is the dip of the orange below red. In this case, not even the red, it's mostly just a dip below that 7.5 range, and more precisely in the 11. We still ended up with some sell signals towards the end of the day that spot on for move back lower on rising 0%, and then in the post market filling back towards that 43.07 setup. And as you can see, we've started modest dip below here in the post market as it was getting close to that 43.07, but then catching a little bit of support right there. But we see that white rising above, but you can see that magenta spike up as well as the yellow pretty quickly within the early configuration of it, and so that's going to give it some back and forth. You get a magenta breaking down below yellow at this particular stage. We would expect to see move back down towards the lows on this, but it's been. And just for the fun of it, I'll throw this one in there. This is the work that I'm doing with the MBI paint bar, where you can see that these magenta candles, violet actually is the color that they're described as, pointing out the orange setups as well as then even moving into the yellow dots and making sure that they're matching. Because if I just made them red, then we would see the same thing. Now they will end up being red on your screen when you finally get it, but working it within the strategy setup so that it is pretty much consistent with what we would do from a buy and sell, but at least the language is there, works, and follows correctly to that. Next setup obviously is making sure I have the blue dots as well as the crossovers with the white moving above red that you see on the little magenta dots at the 0%. And of course the white are MBI spikes, the red when it spikes, and you have green DOC riding above, getting a little bit of extra strength. So as that moves closer, it's just a little more complicated with the amount of code and loops that go through there, but certainly progressing nicely. And as soon as I have that update, I will certainly be sending it out to everyone so that they're most up to date on that. But for now, you have the Catfish et al. That allows you to see those dot setups and how we've been working with those. As always, though, I will be available on Skype chat to go over any unique setups. Trade well. We'll talk to you later.